I just listened to every album by the band Lucifer's Friend, and here are my thoughts. So Lucifer's Friend is a 70s hard rock band. I didn't know anything about them going in. Their name had popped up along with Coven and Black Widow when I was looking at occult rock bands or bands that had founded doom rock. As a whole, I would not say that Lucifer's Friend fits in this category. Most of the time, and especially when they were at their best, they sounded more like straightforward 70s hard rock, sharing a lot of similarities with Deep Purple when they had released things like Machine Head and In Rock. So much like Black Widow does, Lucifer's Friend starts out under a different name, that name being Asterix, and in 1970 they release a self-titled album under the name Asterix, which gets them off to a pretty strong start, especially if you get a version of the album that has its 2 bonus tracks, one of those being If I Could Fly, which was a very good song. Within the same year, 1970, they changed their name officially to Lucifer's Friend and released another self-titled album, now under the name Lucifer's Friend. And this, to me, is their pinnacle, their shining achievement. This album is a fantastic album. And it's really amazing considering they were coming out with this sound of similar intensity as Deep Purple was, and at the same time. And yet no one ever really looks to Lucifer's Friend as being an important part of the pioneering of the hard rock genre. When I was listening to this album, I got a similar feeling that I got when I was listening to Sacrifice by Black Widow, which was just the amazement that this band that had such amazing material had fallen under the radar to such an extent. This remains their best album. This is the best place to start if you want to get into the band. My overall impression of the band as a whole, and it does pertain to my thoughts about this album, is that Lucifer's Friend does not have any bad albums, but this is their only great album. This is their only album that works just as an entire album. That's 10 out of 10 the whole way through. Every album that comes after that, though they range in how good they were, how many good songs there were, these were good albums with maybe 2 to 4 great songs. So yeah, if you're looking to check out the band, then I'm hoping this video can be helpful to you in knowing what are the essential songs on the other albums that you need to be sure to check out without necessarily needing to listen to the entire albums themselves. Their next album, Where the Groupies Killed the Blues, this was also a very strong album. It has my favorite song by them that was not on their self-titled debut album, and that song is Burning Ships. A little bit more of a ballad. It was beautiful, one of the only ballads that make it onto my classic rock playlist. Coming up next, we have I'm Just a Rock and Roll Singer. This album to me was an unusual low spot for where they're at in their career right now. It sounded a little on the lazier and more uninspired side. There were only 1 or 2 songs that I had picked out as being particularly enjoyable. But they bring it right back with their following 2 releases, Banquet and Mind Exploding. Banquet is the other album that some people point to as being one of Lucifer's Friend's best albums. It's definitely worth checking out. Banquet is especially recognizable for being a jazz fusion album. So there is a lot of jazz inspiration coupled with the rock that's in this album, and then the following one, Mind Exploding, gets pretty much straight back into the hard rock song that the hard rock sound, that they had pretty much perfected at this point. At this point, they start pivoting to a more commercial sound, something a bit poppier. So this begins with 1978's release Good Time Warrior. And I'm typically not a fan of it when bands make this transition into being something that's a lot poppier and more commercial friendly. But this album, at least, it does get off to a pretty good start. I was impressed by a few songs on it, like I'll Meet You in L.A., as well as the song Good Times on here is another earworm for me. Just yesterday, it's been 2 months, I think, since I gone through Lucifer's Friend, and just yesterday I couldn't get that song out of my head. They follow this up with Sneak Me In, which tried to be very poppy, very radio friendly, very 80s friendly as well. This album was released in 1980, and the sound that defined the 80s had already begun to take shape. This ended up being my least favorite album by them. They're starting to show that they're not very comfortable in this new sound, this new direction that they're trying to go in. But they bring it right back 1 year later with the release of Mean Machine. This was another strong album. This was worth marking, worth noting. There were several songs on here that I really liked that I'm excited to show you at the end of this video. It's quite a while before another release, and then in 1994, the year I was born, they released the album Sumo Grip, which I don't know why. I think it was because they had already they'd begun flip-flopping between weaker and stronger albums, and that added on to the fact that it's been so much time since their last release. I kind of expected this album to be a bit weaker than it was, but I was pleasantly surprised. There weren't a ton of really obvious hits on this album. Any specific songs I could point out as being amazing, but as a whole album, it was surprisingly solid. It was surprisingly strong, and this is the point where I started realizing that this is a band that just doesn't have any bad albums. It is another long time before they come out with any more music, but they released Too Late to Hate in 2016, and then Black Moon in 2019, I believe. These albums have a similar overall sound, and that production is clearly better because technology has come forward. John Lawton's voice, their vocalist, he's showing some age in his voice, and it almost takes a more operatic tone, I guess, in his older age. But Too Late to Hate sounded a little bit like they were phoning it in, so that made me a little worried about what Black Moon's output was going to be. But finishing off with Black Moon, I was, again, very pleasantly surprised. There were a couple songs on here that just really grabbed my attention, like Call the Captain and Palace of Fools. I'm going to put my overall album ranking right there, and there's one thing I want to communicate about this band. Definitely check out that first self-titled album under the name Lucifer's Friend, and second, really take note of John Lawton's voice. He, when there are conversations about who the best rock vocalists are, people always talk about maybe Robert Plant, or I don't know, maybe Paul Rogers or Freddie Mercury or something. This is a name that never comes up, and it's worth mentioning. I mean, he has a voice of similar power and strength as, say, I was thinking Ian Gillan or Tony Martin. Ian Gillan being from the earlier days of Deep Purple, Tony Martin, filling in the later days of Black Sabbath. Thank you for watching, and here are all my favorite songs.